Dear God, thank you for this day. Thank you for the weather that we have had here in Christchurch. We pray for those who are still suffering the effects of ill weather around the country. And we pray that you will restore those power linkages that need to be restored quickly and communication linkages and keep people safe. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, here we are, last of our evenings on with C.S. Lewis. The major focus tonight is going to be the Narnia stories, and so we'll spend at least an hour on those. But we do want to finish with the note of triumph that is very evident in Lewis's own life at the very end, and so I think that's going to be a good note to conclude on, so that's what we'll intend to do. We've looked at his conversion and what that struggle was for him, the most reluctant convert in Britain at the time, the most miserable and dejected person in Britain he thought he would be that evening. But the key thing for him was this melding together of reason and imagination, and he finds that finally in accepting Christianity as the story that makes sense of the rational thinking about God. He'd come to believe that there was a God, but he hadn't yet grasped the Christian story. And when he grasped the story, as events that unfolded, as a narrative, that made the difference for him. He could link the two things together that way. Then we looked at the broadcast talks, his first ventures into Christian apologetics, and in particular his defense of what becomes mere Christianity. Mere not in the sense of being unimportant, but mere in the sense of being refined down, the essentials of Christianity. So the Christianity that everyone in Christendom would find some assent to. He was so, on some issues like the atonement, he struggled a bit to find a formula which all denominations would essentially give their nod to. But he worked hard on that because that was his goal, to find out that essence of Christianity which everyone wants to proclaim, because he would say that at its core, just those things on which Christians are fully agreed, that is enough to mark Christianity out dramatically from all other worldviews. And so mere Christianity is the result for that. And then last week we looked at the book The Four Loves, but we looked at it as a lens to examine what was happening in his life, what had happened in his own family life, his relationship with Mrs. Moore, the relationship he had with the Inklings, his male friends particularly, and then his chapters on Eros and Agape, which I would suggest to you are well worth reading and in fact contribute, I think, something today still to the debate in Christian ethics and understanding of the nature of salvation even, that has not been matched. So if you can get hold of a copy of the Four Loves, and it's available online, you can listen to most of it online, do that, and I would well recommend it. But tonight we're looking for taking a journey into Narnia, faith, fantasy and fiction, and we'll try to set the Narnia stories in their own context and certainly in the context of his own development, and get a sense of what he's getting at in these stories. Firstly, we've noticed that his is a life defined by grief. His life really begins in dramatic form with the death of his mother in 1908 when he's aged 10, and then late in his life he marries Joy Davidman, but that marriage only lasts for 4 years because then she dies of cancer, and he enters a period of extreme grief, which is utterly and finally reconciled with this account of his own grief in the book A Grief Observed, and his reflection on it after that. So we'll see that what we have here is a story of joy and of tranquility being attained, a story of Christian victory, but it's hard fought, it's hard wrought. It's got after some struggle, and it really takes a lifetime, even for, and perhaps especially for a man like him who is operating at the highest intellectual level within Christianity, influencing lives all over the world, becoming one of the most famous Christians in the world through the 1940s and 50s in particular. and yet he has his own struggles and his own sense that at this moment of crisis, his faith had collapsed like a house of cards. And what did it mean? And what's the insight he needs to grasp to recognise what the change needs to be? When we looked at his writings, we noted that the Narnia books are written between 48 and 56, a series of what he describes as fairy stories. And whereas in the 40s, the majority of his writing had been more adult-oriented literature, Christian literature, that tends to fall away in the first half of the 50s. You get Mere Christianity, which is really just a summary of what he'd done already in the radio talks. And then Surprised by Joy, which is a autobiography of his own spiritual life. So in terms of new creative work in adult Christian literature, there was almost nothing that was happening during that period because he was focusing now on telling children's stories. He called them fairy stories and was very happy to defend them as being that because he felt that fairy stories, so-called, are in fact a way that children gain access to truth and knowledge of the world that we underplay, that we don't value anywhere near enough. And of course, J.R.R. Tolkien is doing something similar with his stories of Middle-earth. Tolkien's stories are quite different. Tolkien himself is a committed Christian, and he and Lewis differed significantly on some things, and those things tended to be the things on which J.R.R. Tolkien thought that Lewis was being dangerously liberal. So he was a very committed Catholic, and you can see that structure in his stories, but his stories are written for a different aim. They're much more focused on the tightness and progress within the story itself. He's creating a whole alternative history. And so, for instance, you've got here a map of Narnia. If you're familiar with maps of Middle-earth, they're much more detailed and much more complicated because Tolkien is writing something that is designed to create a whole new vision of reality, this Middle-earth reality, whereas Lewis is constantly interacting his characters with our earth and our time. But why did he make this shift? Some would suggest that his encounter with Gertrude Anscombe, a philosopher in Oxford, who called into question some of the confidence of his defence of miracles in one of his apologetic works in the 1940s, led him to question a little bit whether purely attaching your witness to Christianity to rational debate was in fact the only way to do the job, to communicate, and perhaps it wasn't even the best way to communicate. So he turns his attention to writing these stories, and over this period his writing in general is starting to decline in quantity, but he produces these books which we're mostly now very familiar with. Now who's read at least one book from the Narnia series? Hands up. Who's read none of them? Right? And who's read anything more than The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe? Right, okay, that's a good number. So there'll be some people familiar with the stories here, so feel free to correct me in my account of them. Lewis's description of how they came about is like this. He said, "Some people seem to think that I began by asking myself how I could say something about Christianity to children, then fixed on the fairy tale as an instrument, then collected information about child psychology and decided what age group I'd write for, then drew up a list of basic Christian truths and hammered out, quote, allegories to embody them. This is all pure moonshine. I couldn't write in that way. It all began with images. Images, imagination, seeing something in his mind. A fawn carrying an umbrella, a queen on a sledge, a magnificent lion. At first there wasn't even anything Christian about them. That element pushed itself in on its own accord. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, all began with a picture of a fawn carrying an umbrella and parcels in a snowy wood. This picture had been in my mind since I was about 16. Then one day when I was about 40, I said to myself, let's try to make a story about it. At first I had very little idea how the story would go, but suddenly Aslan came bounding into it. And he goes on to say that because Aslan was now involved, Aslan provides the structure to the remaining novels. So the whole series emerges out of the appearance of Aslan alongside Mr. Tumnus. That's an account given to children. He has a book called Letters to Children, which is mostly about his writing, about the process of writing. And it's written after the event, so mid to late 50s. And he's receiving huge amounts of correspondence from actual children. So this book is letters written as if to fifth graders in America, so 11 or 12 years old. Now, of those of you who've read the series, I'm going to do a quick poll. Whose favourite book is something other than The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe? And what would they be, you ones who raised your hands? Roland? Yep. Magician's Nephew, yes. Voyage of the Dawn Treader? Amber? The Last Battle? Voyage of the Dawn Treader? Sylvia? Might be The Silver Chair, is it? Or, well, we'll come to them. You might be reminded. And Voyage of the Dawn Treader, okay. Did you manage to see the movie, you Voyage of the Dawn Treader types? Sorry, Jeanette. You're the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, yeah. Yep. I would be actually in the Silver Chair category, but I find the final battle the most intriguing of the books. As a story, I like the Silver Chair, but the Last Battle is the one I find the most inspiring, really. We're going to get some quotes from that in a moment. So here's a list of them. They were written in a different order from the way the stories unfold. So the first one to be written was The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which caused such a sensation that therefore he had the publishers clamouring for more in the series. And The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe would, out of the 15 to 20 million copies sold of the series, that is all the books together, most of which are now sold as a package of the whole series. But The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe on its own would probably be a full third of those sales, because it's the one which everyone wants to start with. And it's the one that's the most famous. Then it was Prince Caspian, Dawn Treader, Silver Chair, and then Horse and His Boy and the Magician's Nephew, which slot in earlier than Caspian, Dawn Treader and Silver Chair. And we'll come back in a moment to why that might be. And The Last Battle is the last one to be published, although it was actually completed and ready for publication before he finished The Magician's Nephew. He had struggled with The Magician's Nephew. He'd put in material which he ultimately cut out and found that he just couldn't round out the story satisfactorily. Part of the appeal of these books in the 1950s were the illustrations by Pauline Baynes. One on the left, the Lucy with the fawn, Mr. Tumnus, is one of the most famous ones associated with the story, in addition to the simple picture of the lamppost in the forest, which is another famous one. And what's happening on the right-hand one? Who's that? Edmund with the White Witch. So that's his encounter, and what tempts him into her fray? Turkish delight, and I can utterly understand that. If ever there's going to be a temptation which would draw a man down, it's going to be Turkish delight. Now, Pauline Baynes was unfortunately the reason for my distrust of C.S. Lewis initially, because she was the one responsible for that very girly cover on The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which I objected to when I was handed it as a 12-year-old boy. You know, here am I thinking, I'm a grown-up man. Well, they're giving me something like this is obviously for girls. But part of the reason that her pictures are like they are is that Lewis sent them back and wanted them more, he said in his phrase, prettied up. He wanted the kids to look more idealistic, more ideal, more pretty. And so they vary in quality, these pictures, as you'll be well aware, and some of them are not as realistic as others. So she gets the relative sizes of the children a bit mixed up sometimes. There's a picture of the children emerging out of the wardrobe, for instance, when they return from Narnia, which they make them all look like 5-year-olds. So they're not perfect, I don't think. However, he was very, very happy with them and maintained his connection with Pauline Baynes right through. And when he won an international award for The Last Battle, she congratulated him on his success, and he said, well, it's really our success. This would not have happened without you. And I think that's right. They struck a chord. So the books have been published and republished, and then republished again. And of course, they came out in 3 movies in the early 2000s, which we'll see the trailers of now. And what I want you to look at here is just to catch a sense, if you haven't seen them, of how the stories are indicated, which is these are trailers, so you're not getting the whole story, obviously. You're trying to get, but a trailer will try and show you the highlights that it thinks will capture your interest. So have a look at that, and particularly just note the way Aslan is portrayed.
Take them. There is a prophecy that 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve will appear to defeat the White Witch and put an end to this 100-year winter.
I think you've made a mistake. We're not heroes.
There's no mistake. Aslan is on the move.
Aslan, we need your help.
I know, but understand, the future of Narnia rests on your courage.
If it's a war Aslan wants, it's a war he shall get.
They come in numbers far greater than our own.
Numbers do not win a battle.
No, but I bet they help. I don't remember any ruins in Narnia.
I wonder who lived here.
I think we did.
think it's time we found out what went on here.
Who are you?
I am Prince Caspian.
You may find Narnia a more savage place than you remember.
All that you know is about to change.
We're home!
Lucy, have you seen this ship before?
It's very Narnian looking, isn't it?
What's going on here?
Evan, the painting!
No, Eustace, no!
Behold our castaways, King and Queen of Narnia.
Refugee!
Your Majesties.
Where in the blazes am I?
You're on the Dawn Treader.
Was it something I said? From C.S. Lewis's epic masterpiece.
Aslan.
You have come far. Your adventure begins now.
Look! Travelers of Narnia, I am your guide.
You are most beautiful.
If it is a distraction for you, I can change form.
No.
There is the source of your trouble.
You mean a witch?
Something far more powerful than a wish. It can steal the light from this world.
How do we stop it?
That sword you carry must be laid at Aslan's table. Only then can their true power be released. You are all about to be tested.
Edmund, come with me. I can make you my king, and much more. My king.
No! Edward!
Onward to our destiny!
What do you think is in there?
Things you can barely imagine.
The fate of Narnia depends on you.
Chronicles of Narnia, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Directed by Michael Apted, this December in digital 3D.
Ripping yarns. The movies were regarded by critics as being getting progressively worse as they went along. The reviews of Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe were pretty positive. First one by Andrew Adamson. The second one, The Silver Chair, suffered from being too closely associated with the Lord of the Rings trilogy and clearly affected by the Lord of the Rings trilogy's success, because a lot of CGI, a lot of battle scenes, it's almost an endless battle scene, and they actually introduce one entire battle that's not in the book. So that's a bit of a problem. It was carried, however, by the main character who played Prince Caspian. I'm trying to say that carefully because the girls in the youth group that I was associated with renamed it Prince Capsicum because he was so hot. But the Voyage of the Dawn Treader is generally seen as being a less successful adaptation and worth watching, but directed by someone different, Michael Apted rather than Andrew Adamson, who was an Aucklander from a missionary family. Had gone through Sunday school in Auckland and understood where Lewis was coming from. Famous before those movies for which, you know, remember? Shrek. He's the director of Shrek, first 2 Shrek movies. Now, I personally think that the BBC TV series on the Chronicles of Narnia is a bit more accessible and a bit more successful, actually, a bit more faithful to the books. So I'd they've done most of the books. I think it's 26 videos all up. They're all available on YouTube. BBC series, 1982, early 1980s. And that's worth looking for, actually. And it's slower moving. They can include more detail in. This is very much a Disney production, these ones here, designed for fast moving, the elements of the stories which lend themselves to fast-paced cinematographic treatment are chosen for that reason. Note the fact that the children the second time round are swept into Narnia from a railway station. That becomes important a bit later. But Aslan, just reflecting on Aslan, I think they get Aslan reasonably good in these adaptations. And Aslan was obviously important to Lewis's vision. As he said, the whole thing came together once the lion bounded in. But it's important to understand what Lewis was doing with him. Aslan is clearly representing the Son of God, but he's not representing Jesus Christ. And there's an important distinction there. And this is Lewis writing again in his letters to children, explaining what's going on here. You are mistaken when you think everything in the book, quote, represents something in this world. Things do that in Pilgrim's Progress, but I'm not writing in that way. Now, Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory where the things and the characters in there, like giant despair and so on, are characters which represent something we would encounter in this life. So he's making a story out of the things we encounter in this life. Bunyan is in the Pilgrim's Progress. But Lewis would say that this is not allegory, it's a story about Narnia. I did not say to myself, quote, let us represent Jesus as he really is in our world today by a lion in Narnia. I said, let us suppose that there was a world like Narnia, and that the Son of God, as he became a man in our world, became a lion there. And then imagine what would have happened. If you think about it, you'll see it's quite a different thing. So Aslan is a lion. He's not purely Jesus Christ in a lion's costume. He's not a man in a lion's costume. And that very idea is challenged even within the stories. In The Horse and His Boy, one of the talking horses, because the noble animals in these stories can talk, and so therefore the lion can talk, so therefore becomes a worthy recipient to represent God in a way that a lion would not in our earth, our experience, because lions can't talk. So Aslan is very much a lion, but Bree, the horse in The Horse and His Boy, one of the horses in The Horse and His Boy, he doubts this story about Aslan completely. He said, it can't be a real lion. The son of the high god, high king from over the sea, couldn't possibly just turn up as a lion. You'd have to have a mane and paws and whiskers. And then Aslan appears before him and says, well, okay, here's my whiskers, here's my mane, here's my paws. Now, that's a reflection of a very classic Christian heresy, or crypto-Christian heresy, which was to doubt the true Godhead of Jesus Christ, that no God worth his salt would appear as a human being, because human beings are flawed, and therefore God couldn't possibly come as a true human being. It would just be pretending to be a human being, in the way that some of the Greek gods did. They appear on earth in the form of a human. But Aslan is very much a lion. He roars. He bats away foes with his paws. He actually fights like a lion. He walks like a lion. Although I think Pauline Baines rather gets her otherwise mostly good illustrations rather wrong with Aslan in this one. I think that's rather turning Aslan not into a lion. I've never seen a lion walk like that. So Aslan was very much a lion. I don't quite know why Lewis approved that one, actually, because it doesn't fit with anything Lewis would say about Aslan. But nonetheless, Aslan is the son of the king from across the seas, God, but not Jesus Christ in this story. He's another appearance of the Son of God in Narnia, an incarnation in Narnia terms, not in earth terms. So it's not allegory. We're not seeing our reality reflected there. It's a Narnian reality, and the story makes some sense with that. Now, taking up your maps, this will become useful because we're going to go through the timeline for Narnia. Narnia proper is the bit in the top half of the illustration, the wildlands to the north, where the White Witch retreats to, and Archenland, which is an acceptable area of settlement of different peoples that are not Narnians, and the Calamine people are the major foes within the Narnia story, the later stories. They come from further south, and of course there's the Great Eastern Ocean where the voyage of the Dawn Treader goes, and that's ends up heading towards the king across the seas, that Aslan's place, and that scene at the end with the enormous wave just sitting there is that scene right near the end of the movie. And Reepicheep, the fighting mouse, elects not to return to Narnia and to go with Aslan into that land. It's quite a moving sort of scene, actually, that one. Yep. Yeah. Oh, the same things happen, but it's a Narnian way. It's not a cross, for instance. It's a table. So yes, this God comes and his son sacrifices himself for those who are sinners and who can't get themselves out of a problem, and is resurrected. So yeah, the story is very much reflective of the same action by God, but it's not Jesus. It's Christ, but it's not Jesus. It's not a human being doing it. Is really the point I'm getting at. It's a very Narnian way of doing things. Yeah, symbolism. Yeah, so it's symbolic. It's not allegorical. Allegorical would be saying, well, this is Jesus. But it's not Jesus. This is an alternative reality that he's describing, but the same problem, and therefore the same thing needs to be solved. Just looking at the timeline, this is the timeline that Lewis himself put together for the history of Narnia. Starts in the order that the books were meant to be finally read, the chronological order of them. So firstly, the creation of Narnia in the year 1, where the beasts are made able to talk, which is a key difference between Narnia and Earth, of course. The White Witch, Jadis, enters Narnia with Diggory. Diggory is the principal human character, the child Diggory, the boy Diggory, and he ends up, through the magical experimentations of his uncle, entering one world where the White Witch is present and is wanting to. The White Witch herself is wanting to escape that world. She comes out of that world with Diggory and into this world just under creation in Narnia. So Diggory is responsible for the introduction of evil into Narnia, unwittingly. Polly Plummer and Diggory Kirk. Now that name Kirk, of course, is the same name as Professor Kirk, who appears in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and the Magician's Nephew is quite specific. This is Professor Kirk as a child, who then has a tree in his front garden, which he eventually turns into a wardrobe, which is the wardrobe they go through in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe later on, when the children are evacuated out to stay with Professor Kirk. Lewis himself had some children staying with him in that evacuation scheme during World War II. And so he understood that story and the effect of that on children. Professor Kirk is suggested in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe version as being based on his teacher that he calls the Great Knock, Kirkpatrick. And that is clear that there's some elements of that in that character. There are elements of Lewis himself in that character. But I find it interesting that Professor Kirk is his title. And of course, Kirk also means in Scottish church. And a professing church is what was very much in the news and in Christian consciousness in the 1940s and early 50s in terms of engaging with Nazism. So I think there's a number of layers going on with Professor Kirk. But The Magician's Nephew, of course, is written retrospectively. It's written right near the end of the series to fill a gap. We'll come back to that in a second. Firstly, so we then get the creation of Narnia takes place, and it's a good yarn, and then time passes. In fact, in Narnian terms, 200 years passes. Only one lifetime in Earth terms. There's no connection between Earth time and Narnian time. So you'll be familiar with the fact that Lucy disappears into the wardrobe, seems to have been gone for ages in her experience, and the children didn't even know the other children didn't even notice that she was missing. And that's why they disbelieve her. You've just been hiding in there for a few minutes. But what happens then in the prehistory for The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe between the creation story and Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe is that outlaws from Archenland fly across the southern desert. Take a look at your maps. Southern desert is down in the south, down here. So they're coming up from the south. There's the desert area there. And they are invading from Arkan. They fly across the southern desert and set up a new kingdom of Calaman. They go the other way, sorry. They go from north to south. Now, those are rebels and outlaws, and that's the origin of this, what will be the rebel kingdom and the major protagonists or antagonists for the history of Narnia from that point onwards. And the empire of Calaman spreads mightily. Calaman colonizes the land of Telmar to the west of Narnia, and the White Witch, Jadis, returns to Narnia out of the far north because she's got the opportunity and imposes this long winter. A winter where it's always winter but never Christmas. I think that's a wonderful little image that Lewis uses for a Northern Hemisphere audience. Always winter but never Christmas. Relentlessly cold weather but never the good stuff. Then the Pevensey children arrive in Narnia. First Lucy, then Edmund. But the treachery of Edmund sets up the bulk of the first half of the story. Aslan is sacrificed. The White Witch is defeated and the long winter is ended. Peter becomes High King of Narnia. The story of the table, of course, is that Aslan submits to the White Witch's demand to buy back the life of Edmund, who has trapped himself by his actions into being under her command. And this is deep magic from the dawn of time, that he has to comply with this. It doesn't mean the end of the story, of course, because he does come back. He is resurrected. The stone table is broken. And he puts that down to deeper magic from before the dawn of time, which the White Witch was unaware of. This is picking up a classic Christian theory of the atonement called the ransom theory, where the theory of the atonement there is that what Christ's work on the cross was that he purchased back by his death the lives of all humanity and all creation, in fact, from the devil. But in the process, tricked the devil into thinking that the devil had won. But because of the resurrection, it turned out the devil hadn't won after all, because God brought him back to life. So he hadn't killed the Son of God, he hadn't gained the life of the Son of God, but he'd released his hold on the world. The ransom theory. The book finishes with largely, in terms of the action in it, with the great battle which defeats the White Witch. But there's a chapter or two which follows on, and that's just completing the story as the children grow up. So they grow up in Narnia terms, and King Peter leads a successful raid on the Northern Giants. Queen Susan and King Edmund visit the court of Calamen down in the south. King Loon of Archenland discovers his long-lost son Prince Kor and defeats a treacherous attack from Prince Rabadesh of Calamen. And the Pevensies head out right at the end of the book, hunting the white stag, and then find the lamppost and then the wardrobe, and reappear again in Professor Kirk's house as children. And them spilling out of the wardrobe as they return, there is that image of Pauline Baines, which I think overemphasises the fact that they're now small children again. That I think she gets the proportions quite wrong in that picture. I've seen the wardrobe, by the way. There's 5 of them. 5 of them claim to be the wardrobe. Lewis describes it as a plain type of wardrobe with a big mirror on it. You know, the type of a freestanding wardrobe with a full length mirror in an oval shaped. In the Marion Wade Center at Wheaton College in Chicago, they make a great fuss about the fact that they've got C.S. Lewis's wardrobe, but it's not anything like described in the book. It's a highly ornate, highly carved one which has no mirror on the front at all, and it sits in the reception area for the Marion Wade Center, which is devoted largely to C.S. Lewis, but also to any of the Inklings and his friends and their writings. And there's coats hanging in it. And they tell the story that a little boy came in one time fascinated by this wardrobe, believing it to be the wardrobe, and he opens the door very gingerly and pushes through the coats and pushes the back and finds that the back doesn't go any further. He doesn't get a portal into the world, and he turned around and said, perhaps it only works when there's no adults here. I think it's quite a nice story, actually. But it's not the wardrobe. The wardrobe is probably one held in Oxford, and probably the one that's in the kilns now. But it's a fictional wardrobe, so let's not worry too much about the actual event. But he's describing one that he remembers from his own childhood, and we've most of us seen those ones. They were quite a common, fairly ordinary wardrobe at the time. Now, The Horse and His Boy is a story within the story. This is something which happens within the span of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that's the bit which describes those events in 1014. Is a story of a quest to discover identity. And so the boy who becomes Prince Kor is the boy who is trying to escape. He thinks he's someone else, and he turns out to be the son, or the lost son of King Loon of Archenland. And two talking horses. He travels with a girl called Aravis. And I was so taken with the story in the early 1980s, I wanted to name our first daughter Aravis, but my wife had much greater sense than I did and put a veto on it. Now, note if you go to the order of writing, that The Horse and His Boy was one of the later ones. And it's clear that what's happening here is that Lewis realised that he had set up a series of events early-ish in the story of Narnia, and then 3 books which were much later, but it was imbalanced. The Prince Caspian, Dawn Treader, and the Silver Chair have some relation to one another in terms of time, but there is a big gap between them and the events of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So he's filling the gap. He's providing an origin story and another story to fill out the story as the whole series unfolds. When you get to the Prince Capsicum story, you get another invasion. People are always being threatened in Narnia. So the Telmarines. The Telmarines are not from the sea, but from the earth. They're earth people. Tellus being a word for the earth, who hate the sea, who don't want to have anything to do with the water at all. They involve, and Caspian I becomes king of Narnia. Sometime later, Prince Caspian, son of Caspian IX, is born. Caspian IX is murdered by his brother Miraz, who usurps the throne, and the Pevensies return, and Prince Caspian is the major story then, and that's how that one unfolds. It's the battle for control between him and his uncle Miraz, a civil war in Narnia, and by the aid of Aslan and of the Pevensies, summoned, and then Caspian summons with Queen Susan's magic horn the armies, and Miraz is defeated and killed. Caspian becomes King Caspian X of Narnia. In the book, there's a lot of interaction between Aslan and the children, particularly Lucy again. Lucy is the key character that Aslan favours and understands Aslan. She gets Aslan's importance. And some interaction between Caspian and Aslan, but not much. And there's fewer battles in it than in the movie. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader also involves Caspian X, who was Prince Caspian. And this is a voyage to the end of the world, which is a little bit of a contradiction, because if Caspian is one of the Telmarines, who traditionally did not like the sea, he heads out on this voyage. Now, one assumes that he's been enculturated then to not fear the sea in the same way that his forebears did. But there's a slight contradiction in the story there. It's a sort of contradiction in Lewis's stories that J.R.R. Tolkien hated. He thought that his criticism of the Narnia stories was they weren't precise enough. There were too many loose details in it. So the Voyage of the Dawn Treader is the story of that journey, and introduces a new character, Eustace Scrubb. He's a cousin of the children, and happened to be visiting at the time when the picture draws them into Narnia, and ends up there himself by mistake, and has to be beaten around the ears a few times to getting a sense of behaving and getting the vision. He eventually gets there, but he's a bit of a thorn in the flesh for everybody. He's the naughty boy of the group. At the end of that story, Caspian is married, and the Pevensey children are told they're not coming back to Narnia. That's it. They've done their dash. They are given the opportunity to enter the land across the sea, but Aslan's not really encouraging them to, because he thinks they should go back to Earth, where they came from, and they do. But they're told at that point that they're not going to return to Narnia, which is something which upsets them at the time. We'll find that in the last battle they reappear, but there's a twist in that tale. The next one is the Silver Chair, which takes the account further forward. Again, in continuity with the two immediately prior to it. And Eustace and Jill, now Jill Pole, a friend of Eustace's, who are both at the same school and who are being bullied at that school and fairly miserable, whisked out of the school and turn up in Narnia, much to Jill's surprise. And the story concludes actually with Caspian briefly returning to Earth with them to sort out the bullies. So the bullies get a bit of a confrontation with Caspian, and then he returns back. He's an elderly man by this stage, and his son Rillian takes over. Then we'll go back to our lineup here. The Last Battle, as I said, is the last book to be published, so it is published in the order in which it's meant to be read. There's a lot of debate amongst the scholars of C.S. Lewis as to how you should read the series. Some would say you should read it in the order he wrote them and publish them, rather than the order of the story they come in. Most now settle for the order of the story, the way the narrative unfolds. But it's interesting that Andrew Adamson and Disney went for the original order. So The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Caspian, and Voyage of the Dawn Treader, as possibly simply because they're the most easy to portray, the ones they thought would make the biggest splash in the case of Voyage of the Dawn Treader. But The Silver Chair and The Horse and His Boy are very would lend themselves very much to movie making too. They're all quest stories. There's lots of journeys in them, lots of adventures along the way, character development and so on. So that all fit their way in. But the reviews and success of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader was just simply not encouraging enough for Disney to want to repeat the exercise. The bubble had burst a little bit in relation to the Narnia stories, and so they weren't. The next one wasn't made. There's lots of talk about new ones coming out on Netflix and other things like that, but we'll wait and see. The Last Battle is very much about eschatology. It's very much about the end of the world and the Last Judgment. And what you find in The Last Battle is a number of curious things taking place. There's a rebellion led by Shift the Ape. King Tyrion of Narnia is rescued by Eustace and Jill, who are the key children involved in the humans who come into Narnia through most of the book. But Narnia is in the hand of the Calamines, and the last battle happens. You get the end of Narnia and the end of the world. All the children, however, appear except Susan. Susan, the older girl of the Pevensey children, is said to have lost interest in Narnia, and so she doesn't turn up. So really it's just a realistic portrayal of someone who's lost interest in faith. Lewis is putting there, not everyone stays the course. But the children, having been told that they are not returning to Narnia, do turn up. But there's a twist in that tale. Because they don't turn up in the same way that they always used to. Remember that scene at the railway station? This is how they describe what was happening. You haven't yet told, Eustace said to King Peter, you haven't yet told us how you got here. Well, there's not so much to tell, said Peter. Edmund and I were standing on the platform and we saw your train coming in. That's Eustace's train. Eustace was on a train and it was whisked away. I remember thinking it was taking the bend far too fast. And I remember thinking how funny it was that our people were probably in the same train, although Lucy didn't know about it. Your people, High King? I mean, my father and mother, Edmund's, Lucy's and mine. Why were they? Asked Jill. You don't mean to say they know about Narnia? Oh no, it had nothing to do with Narnia. They were on their way to Bristol. I'd only heard they were going that morning, but Edmund said they were bound to be going by that train. Edmund was the sort of person who knows about railways. What happened then? Well, it's not very easy to describe, is it, Edmund? Said the High King. Not very, said Edmund. It wasn't at all like that other time when we were pulled out of our own world by magic. It was a frightful roar and something hit me with a bang, but it didn't hurt. And I felt not so much scared as, well, excited. Oh, and there's this one queer thing. I had a rather sore knee from a hack at rugger. I noticed that it is suddenly gone, and I felt very light. And then here we were. Aslan, at the end of the book, the very last few pages, explains to them, the victory has been won in the story. Aslan is proven to be the judge and the king of Narnia again. Lucy says, We're so afraid of being sent away, Aslan, and you have sent us back into our own world so often. No fear of that, said Aslan. Have you not guessed? Their hearts leapt, and a wild hope rose within them. There was a real railway accident, said Aslan softly. Your father and mother and all of you are, as you used to call it in the Shadowlands, dead. The term is over, the holidays have begun, the dream is ended, and this is the morning. So the children don't actually arrive in Narnia. They arrive in paradise. They arrive in the presence of God as people who have died rather than people who are whisked away by magic into Narnia. And we'll come back to that at the very end. Lewis himself said that if you want to understand the theology that's going on in these books, you'll get it this way. The Magician's Nephew is about creation and evil. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is about crucifixion and resurrection. Horse and His Boy about calling and conversion. Prince Caspian, the restoration of true religion after it being taken over by those who had deteriorated. Voyage of the Dawn Treader about the spiritual life. And that's very much epitomised in the character of Reapy Cheap, who realises that he doesn't want to return to his old life. He wants to simply go and be with Aslan in the kingdom beyond the sea. The Silver Chair is the ongoing war against evil, and the last battle is eschatology, end of the world and last judgment. So he was backfilling when he wrote the last three books to make sure that he had a full coverage of the spectrum of belief that he outlines in Mere Christianity, actually. This is him seeking to make this a fairly integrated Christian witness through story. But it would be fair to say that in The Last Battle, which I think is a really, really good book, it's very obviously theological in its sense. It's fairly heavy-handed, where it's less so in the other books. Now, I think it needs to be fairly heavy-handed, but it's still narrative-based. It's still got sort of characters you expect in Narnia, but it's very clearly shaped by the Christian idea. So it's certainly theology, but it's theology through story. Now, those of you who've read The Last Battle will be familiar with a scene where there's effectively a judgment going on, a sorting going on. And in one of the articles I've written on C.S. Lewis, I'm trying to explore what his view of judgment, heaven and hell is. And it's clear that Lewis has a view that heaven is something which is of your making. God grants you the opportunity to become more and more engaged with Him in your own particular way. There's no one vision of heaven that's evident there. Hell, he is effectively non-existent. He's pretty much an annihilationist, Lewis, in his view of hell. It's not a place of punishment, it's a place of anonymity and darkness. And the characteristic of that in the Last Battle is that those talking animals from Narnia who choose not to go with Aslan end up in a place where they can no longer speak. So the gift of speaking is robbed from them. So they become just like any other animal and are not part of this engaged world that can engage with God and Aslan in the hereafter. So he has a particular line on the end times. Also explained in The Great Divorce, actually. The heaven side of it is explored in much greater detail in The Great Divorce. Now, those of you who are familiar with the stories, what are your comments and thoughts after that? Are there any events in particular which you want to celebrate that have stuck in your mind from those stories? Bit obscure. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Good. Yeah, of course. Yeah, and this is what Lewis is trying to engender in people, that get your imagination going, and it's as powerful a way of engaging with God as rationality and logic is. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's um, it even the way he describes it, the ongoing war against evil. It's sort of this is just more of the same. He's not. No, there are no major new events in it which explain Narnia. So it's in some people's assessment would be one of the weaker ones of the series. I quite like it. I find myself enjoying that narrative actually, but mm. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. I think that's a fair comment. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, you do get a bit of a feeling that the Lion, the Witch, the Robber, you almost fired all these bolts at once, and then had to turn it into a series, if you like, because it's almost the whole story, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. The last battle isn't much of a narrative story actually, but it has a lot more theology in it. So there's plenty of theology to hang on to there, but yes, it's an uneven series. I think it'd be fair to say. All of them pretty well received, and the last battle is the one that got this international award for its publication. But in some ways, that would have been a recognition of the contribution of the whole series, in the way that the third Lord of the Rings movie got all the Oscars, but it was recognising all three. Warren. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Both worlds end. The human Earth and the Narnian Earth end at the same time. Certainly for the Pevensey family, but a new world is they enter into this new world, and they can hardly see the difference in terms of the seamless nature of it. But everything is different. Yeah. So I encourage you to reread Narnia. I think they're well worth going over. I've read the series about 3 times, not in the last 10 years, I must say. So I need to go back to them and do them again. They're readily available, and if you like seeing things on videos, then look at the BBC series. It's pretty good. I don't think you get much of Lewis really in the movies, but they have their charm. I want to conclude this series, though, with returning to Lewis himself and picking up on the nature of his discussion of the 4 loves. Remember that he talked about these 3 natural forms of love, which he sees as need loves that come out of that we love for a reason. It's that big question in the book of Job, you know, does Job love me for naught? Does Job just simply love me because he loves me? Or does he think this is the way to keep prosperous or to have status and or maintain your salvation? But the affection, friendship, and being in love between man and a woman are rated by Lewis as the natural need loves, to be contrasted to agape, God's love, which is God himself, of course, because God is love, which is a gift love, where God is actually giving himself to us and giving himself unselfishly and without something that would gain for him. We're going to hear the introduction to the agape chapter, which sets them in context, because the agape is not to be seen as being only superior to the others or somehow a replacement for the others, because if those others are placed in submission to agape, Lewis says, they can actually be redeemed and turned into something which is actually positive and good in and of themselves, with agape characteristics attached to them. So let's hear that presentation by him. This is his own voice from those tapes they've done in America.
In Greek, they have 4 words for love. Storge, S-T-O-R-G-E, means affection, the sort of love there ought to be between near relations. Philia, P-H-I-L-I-A, means friendship. Eros, E-R-O-S, is of course the love between the sexes. And agape, A-G-A-P-E, is love in the Christian sense, God's love for man and the Christian's love for the brethren. All through these talks I've been touching very lightly on a theme which anyone who was treating the natural loves from a Christian point of view would have emphasized far more strongly a few centuries ago. If the Victorians needed the reminder that natural love is not enough, the old theologians were always saying very loudly and sternly that natural love is likely to be a great deal too much. The danger of loving our fellow creatures too little was less present to their minds than that of loving them idolatrously. In every wife, mother, child, and friend they saw a possible rival to God, and so, of course, does our Lord. There was therefore no question in my mind of simple dissent from the older doctrine. There has been a difference of method. I have taken a roundabout way. In my critique of the loves, I have stressed their rivalry to God less than their failure without God to be completely or to remain securely the sorts of love they profess to be. And this, I hoped, might make it easier for us to believe, and not merely to acknowledge verbally, that they are, after all, second things. Because to let us down while legitimately attracting us is the very characteristic of a second thing which has been treated as a first thing. There is a quite different and highly respected way of trying to divert us from inordinate love of the creature, which I find myself compelled to reject, though I do so with trembling. In words that can still bring tears to a man's eyes, St. Augustine describes the desolation in which he was plunged by the death of his great friend Nebridius. He then goes on to draw what he thinks the moral. This is what comes, he says, of giving your heart to anything but God. All creatures are temporary. It's the very nature of the universe that all individuals should pass away and make room for others. You can't have a temporal universe on any other terms, just as you can't have a spoken sentence unless each word, after filling the air for a moment, passes away and gives place to the next. To give one's heart to a created being is therefore to court disaster. If love is to mean in the long run happiness, not misery, it must be love for the only beloved that does not pass away. Now, of course, this is obvious and excellent sense. Don't put your goods in a leaky vessel. Don't spend much on a temporary building. There's perhaps no man in the world to whom such canny maxims make a stronger appeal than they do to me. As a boy, though I liked chocolate better, I always bought toffee. It lasted longer. I'm almost incurably cautious, no gambler, a safety-first man. Gilt-edged securities for me, however low the rate of interest. Of all arguments against excessive love for a fellow creature, none makes so strong a natural appeal to me as, be careful, this may mean suffering. But when I respond to this natural appeal, I feel myself to be 1,000 miles away from the spirit of Christianity. If I'm certain of anything, I'm sure that Christ did not teach in order to confirm my congenital preference for safe investments. And who could conceivably begin to love God on the ground that he is a safer investment, offers better security? Who could even include it among his grounds for loving? One has to be outside the world of love, of all loves, before one thus calculates. Such a view doesn't raise us above the natural affections, it sinks us below them. Eros himself, lawless and rebellious, when he prefers the beloved to happiness, is nearer love itself than this. For our master is one who shed tears at the grave of Lazarus, who mourned over the approaching ruin of his earthly country, and, loving all, yet had one disciple whom in a special sense he loved. And even if it were true that precautions against heartbreak were our highest practical wisdom, even if it were possible for that reason to choose the love of God, would this choice be a precaution? That God offers us security, not gilt-edged but solid gold, I well believe, but not security from sorrow. His love too may break the heart. A broken and a contrite heart awaits most surely those who follow that road most faithfully. For Christ himself that road leads to, why hast thou forsaken me? There is in fact no escape into security along the line St. Augustine suggests, or along any other. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly be broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one and nothing, not even an animal. You must carefully wrap it round with hobbies and little luxuries and routine and avoidances of entanglement, and then lock it up in the casket or coffin of your own selfishness. And this means that in the long run, the alternative to tragedy, or at least to the threat of tragedy, is damnation. For in that casket, safe, still, and unventilated in the darkness, it will go bad. Not broken, but finally unbreakable, impenetrable, resistant to all good and joy. It's like hiding the talent in the napkin, and for much the same reason, I knew thee that thou wert a hard man. Christ did not teach and suffer, in order that we should become more cautious of our own happiness, even in our natural loves. If a man is not uncalculating and that way reckless in loving his earthly beloveds whom he has seen, how will he be so in his love for God whom he has not seen? We should draw nearer to the love of God, not by attempting to avoid the sufferings inherent in any love, but by accepting them and offering them to him, by throwing away all defensive armour, taking all risks, descending, when he so wills, into all tribulations. As so often, the words of our Lord himself are at once far fiercer and far more tolerable than those of the doctors. He says nothing about guarding ourselves from earthly loves for fear they should bring.
It's 1958, so what's on his mind is that he's married Joy Davidman and she's dying, been diagnosed with cancer, and he realizes that all love involves risk. And so he cites Augustine, who says, who's grieving over the loss of a friend, and Augustine's response is, I should never have loved so much. I should not just simply have not given my love to that one because it's too painful when the friend is lost. But Lewis says that's actually not the way to respond to this. This is not the answer. That these other loves, these natural loves, which start with our need, genuinely reflect a need, but can be transformed into something which God can redeem with his agape love. So he has a much more positive view of the other three loves through the lens of agape. This is his description of what he means a bit further on in that same tape. God's love is utterly dissociated from need, so agape. It is manifested first in creation and then in redemption. The doctrine that God was under no necessity to create is not a bit of useless and abstract scholasticism. It is essential, for it reveals the nature of agape. That which in itself is complete, self-sufficient, eternally blessed, which has no wants to satisfy, creates what it does not need, and does so, seeing at the very moment of creation eventual necessity for the crucifixion. Insofar as we have become capable of that sort of love, agape is entering our lives. And this is the redemptive element of agape, that it can actually transform for us those loves which are natural to us, which are going to become destructive if left to their own devices. So that element in our natural loves, which consists of our need for the beloved, the thing we're loving, is not love itself. But don't misunderstand, this element is not a sin or impurity in our love which we must try to expel. The need for the beloved is no more a sin than the need for one's breakfast. The loss of appetite for either would show something wrong. Now he's trying to come to some sort of self-understanding of how the pain of loving is somehow part of the story. And when Joy Davidman dies in 1960, and he writes the book, A Grief Observed, under the name of N.W. Clerk, and just as an aside on that, he writes anonymously because he doesn't want his close friends to realise this is something he's laid his heart out on, because he doesn't want to face them asking questions about it. The irony was they all recognised immediately, the ones who knew him recognised immediately who it was, and the people who didn't know him didn't recognise. So he got sent recommendations to buy the book from people who didn't know him very well. Here's a good book on grief. Why don't you buy that one and try to understand that? N.W. Clerk, by the way, is a combination of non-de-plumes he'd used before. N.W. is simply a Latin phrase which means some unknown person, and a clerk is a writer. So basically he's saying some unknown writer. It's a very Oxford joke. N.W. Clerk. It's eventually published under his own name, but only after he dies. Now, in The Grief Observed, it's this very raw account of him going through the grief process, and he seems to have been unaware that it's going to be a process. He goes through a stage of just feeling that God's gone, God's not responding, and what's happening, why is God doing this? Then he's worried about losing a sense of who Joy was, and he makes comments like, I'm not happy with any of the photographs of her. They don't portray what she was like, and I'm losing an image of what she was like. Any of you who've gone through this sort of grief will know that these sort of things happen consistently in this process. But eventually he comes around to this point of thinking, well, maybe the grief itself is part of the love. And if you see it in the way that he's just portrayed in that bit we heard there, that if all creatures, all creaturely things that you might love, a person or a thing, an animal, if we accept the fact that all of those are going to pass away, all of them are going to die, then you are instantly and inherently taking the risk if you're going to love them, because you know that at some point one or the other of you is going to lose the other. So grief is going to be part of the story, and the act of entering into the relationship knowing that is itself a glimpse of agape love, he's suggesting. This is God showing us that love can be a bigger thing than just what I get out of it. That I can love even though I know I'm going to lose. So he describes it as being part of the deal. So in the end, he comes to a point of tranquility where he actually says that he thinks that the loss of Joy Davidman ends up with a purer form of love for her than he might otherwise have had, because he now sees her in the way that God would see her, that he loved her simply for what she was and is now, rather than for what she can give back to him in terms of her presence and her comfort and her encouragement and all those things which he naturally misses. So for him, there's a transformation takes place where he then applies it right back to the start of his life and the death of his mother, and sees that he didn't obviously understand that at the age of 10, but he now sees that that was what was happening for him then too, that he loved his mother so much but had no resource to be able to understand the love of God feeding into it, where he could turn it into something positive and see her as an important memory. I can remember very distinctly the process of grieving for my father. It lasted about a year, I reckon. Now, I wasn't actually all that close to my father in many ways, I didn't think. But I would be driving along the motorway in Auckland and I'd sort of tear up when a song came on the radio that reminded me a bit of him, and I'd sort of tear up and say that this was happening for quite a long time. But then one Saturday morning I woke up and I realised that I was no longer missing what I once had. I was just feeling pleased that I'd once had it. And so Dad was put in a different perspective for me. And this is something like what he's getting at. Don't go down the line of denigrating these natural loves, he's saying. Instead, redeem them. Allow God's love to redeem them. Allow God's love to flood into them and turn them into something else. Turn them into something much more like God himself, God's own love. And that way you will reach a point of peace and understanding and reconciliation with the world and with life. And that's how he described himself as being after he'd worked through this process. So a life framed by grief ends up a life of peace and celebration of God's love, which I think is quite a beautiful picture, actually. And just to reinforce that and to conclude our series, I'm going to read the last paragraph from The Last Battle, which is just after he's told the children that they're dead. You know, I've broken it to the Pevensey children that they've all been killed in that railway accident, and that's what brought them there. So the term is over, the holidays have begun, the dream is ended, and this is the morning. And then we go on. And as he spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion, but the things that began to happen after that were so great and beautiful that I cannot write them. And for us, this is the end of all the stories, and we can most truly say that they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All their life in this world and all their adventures in Narnia had only been a cover and a title page. Now at last they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. That's a picture of where he himself ended in his perception of his relationship with God and his perception of life. And so when he died in 1963, he came to a much more peaceful place and was happy to go. And he had a clear understanding he would see joy again, but not in the way of being husband and wife. They just see each other and celebrate the fact they were both in the same place and both in the presence of God. And that it's the God being present with them that would be the telling point for them. The witness of C.S. Lewis. That's all.